So I guess my first question would be, how did you both decide you wanted to get involved with SCMR, or how did you kind of just get into it in the first place?
Well, when we moved here, we were approached by the two people that ran it before us to play on concerts. And so we got to know the society that way and got to know a few of the people on the board and, of course, the people in the audience. They have a very loyal, enthusiastic audience. So we knew it was a very good institution with a lot of history behind it and innovation, and it seemed fun. So we had no ideas of leadership other than playing concerts when we got to know. And then when these two gentlemen retired, they reached out to us to come and have a chat about it. So it was a little bit informal and nice, kind of getting to know each other. And then that was it. And then they said, "Well, how would you guys like to take over?" We thought, "Well, we'll give it a shot. And if you still like us after a few years, we'll keep going."
That's amazing. Okay, that's amazing.
When they decided to step down and Linda Gillum and Don Hunsberger approached us, it was the first time that they were going to have, I think actually the first time a married couple would be running the series together. And it was really convenient for us because, of course, we could do the planning anytime.
I was wondering, do you have a specific process that goes into picking the repertoire, and do the musicians ever give input, or like how do you come up with that?
Yeah. Have you ever watched that movie Minority Report where
I have not.
yeah, no, kind of, it feels like that a little bit. You know, we have an awful lot of ideas, and musicians give us ideas,
Okay.
and audience also give us idea. And so we compile just a huge database of stuff. And of course, in recent years, when we've been trying to promote more composers of color, underrepresented, and female composers, there's even more great stuff out there. So in a way, it's actually kind of hard. We've got so many ideas to get it to be cohesive. That's the hard thing. How do you get a concert to feel like not just like we threw a bunch of things together that we liked and hope it works? So
Yeah.
I think we start off with one major piece. Like let's say this last concert we did, we really knew we wanted to do Clara Schumann romances and this wonderful composer that I'm not going to pronounce it correctly.
Dora Pejovic.
Yeah. So we knew we wanted to do that. And in that way, we were like, okay, those are the two big things. And what would fit with that? And then Brahms fit really nicely. And then everything was kind of Sturm und Drang. So we knew we wanted to end it kind of easy. And that's how the Chrysler kind of came into that. So we try and think of the whole thing as like a journey for the audience with these main things. And then how we kind of get the audience to come into the journey and send them out in a good way too. So.
Oh, nice.
There's almost always a deep dive on YouTube. And it could be that we just sit down and we're thinking of a particular piece. So we look that up to listen to it. We may already know it. 4A Piano Quartet is coming up this year. That's a great one to listen to while you're in the mood for planning. And, you know, all of a sudden it'll give you suggestions for other things to listen to. And we'll go through and almost without fail find something that we've never heard of. And that might become a piece of interest, or it might lead us to another thing. And so it depends. It all could be based on the instrumentation we're already thinking of, musicians we want to invite to play, what kinds of things would we have them play. But what Erik described about our most recent concert is just that we always find something that we're really excited to share. And then it's kind of like menu planning, right? There's a dish you really want to cook, and what else goes well with it? What can we pair with that? So it's a really fun process. And to his point about always having things that we can't get to every year, we have so many things we want to do. So we keep a running list of the pieces we didn't get to fit into a given season, and those usually find their way onto a future season. You now can find so much that you might never otherwise bump into. In the case of this piece by Dora that we played, none of the four of us who played it had performed anything by her. David Ying was aware that there is a really great cello sonata that she wrote, but you know, none of us would have come to suggest that. So bumping into it virtually was a great introduction to her music.
How has working with the other SCMR musicians influenced the way that you approach chamber music in general? So in settings outside of SCMR, how does what you've kind of done here, how does it translate to some extent?
I think probably we feel very grateful to the people that put concerts on elsewhere because we know how much goes into it, you know. So I think before this, you come naively to a thing thinking, well, this just happens. You make a program, you hire people, it's great. No. There's so much more. There's so many great volunteers. There's so many great board people that do different things, or people that offer to usher, print programs, write program notes, fundraise. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. This is the fun part, right? And so when we, after our experience here, go anywhere else around the country to play, we're always mindful to like thank the non-musician people there, like thank you for doing what you, so we can make music, So I think it's helped us get a perspective a little bit.
It feels easy when we go somewhere else because we didn't take part in all of the planning, and it just gives you a different perspective. But I certainly love the feeling of coming together with people, usually for just a week, right? I mean, we're always playing with colleagues that we're familiar with, and it might be colleagues that we perform elsewhere with. But for these programs, we're usually putting it together with everyone's busy schedules, with a week of rehearsals, and just kind of the excitement of coming together in that way. That definitely translates when you travel and play elsewhere.
So in that kind of short time frame that you're working with amongst everyone's schedules, what are rehearsals like?
Well, I studied with William Prussell, who was a longtime first violinist of the Cleveland Quartet. And he went on to play a lot of chamber music after his time with the quartet. And I always said, wow, what is that like? Because you made some of your career in this very intense chamber music setting. And he said, well, I think you can have 2 rehearsals or 12 rehearsals, but anything in between gets a little bit difficult. So we try to be mindful when we're programming and making the rehearsal schedule. We do have more than 2 rehearsals, I can assure you. But if you're living in a string quartet, you're going to do deep dives into intonation and how are we conceptualizing the music of this composer. And of course, there just isn't all of that time when you come in to put something together more quickly. I always love playing with members of the Ying Quartet or members of any preformed group, because when they get out of it, you might expect that they're going to come in with, and this is how we need to rehearse. And you know what? They're just as excited to be in a fresh group and put things together quickly. And it's everyone bringing their A game, because we know we don't have a few months. We don't have a bunch of weeks. We're not going to perform this 8 times this year. We get this one concert. So I think everybody comes to it with a lot of energy and openness, and it makes it possible to kind of keep things moving.
So the next one would be, how do you decide on who's playing each concert? Is it like interest based, but from like a pool of musicians that you already are in connection with, or how does that work?
That's one of the harder things of the job, I think, because there are so many good people here in Rochester in the orchestra and at school. And invariably, we'll go a season and think of a friend or dear colleague or someone who like, oh gosh, we didn't do anything this year. We make a mental note of saying, okay, well, we've had Lars and Arden. Now we're going to make sure we get Ben in next year. Or, the point is we try and just rotate through people as we go. We do also think specifically about certain people for certain things. So, for clarinet, I know Michael really wants to play a certain thing, and we'll kind of program that for him. Kenny maybe would do something else. So we kind of know what people want to do a little bit, but it's hard. And we wish we could have everybody play everything, but there's no. And we learned long ago that people may be annoyed or not, and you just have to live with that and try and be fair and do the best you can.
The other thing we learned is that people may be available or not.
Yeah.
I remember in our first year's programming, we would plan out the concerts with specific personnel, and then once we got into inviting people, we'd find out, well, this person isn't available in March, but this person can't do this. And so what we found was the best thing was to program the music. If there was really something very specific that we knew we needed a particular player, of course, we'd make sure they're available. But with an embarrassment of riches of so many great players, I would say there have been concerts that have gone through 3 or 4 iterations of personnel before we get to the final concert. Right. And the final result is always great. So we try to stay open-minded about, this is going to be a great concert almost regardless of who's on stage.
And funny enough, it took us maybe 4 or 5 years to figure out. But in our first year, Don Hansberger told us to do that. So he was right all along.
He said, program the music you'll get the players.
But are there any projects that have happened or will be happening that you're most excited about? And
yeah, actually, just
why?
mentioning Don Hansberger, of course, who unfortunately passed away a few days ago, and it's very fresh. We're so excited about the next concert in January, which is going to be this big wind concert. He would have loved it, having the chamber music players play an octet, and then have the students from Eastman, the harmony ensemble, which is under Mark Scatterday, of course, playing an octet too. We're going to have double octet on stage, and I think Don will be looking down pretty happy on that day, seeing so many wind players on stage. So we love doing that. We've never really collaborated with a student ensemble before, because that's they have their own thing at school and elsewhere. But this was a special thing because of Mark being on our board, and we've always wanted to make this happen. And it's interesting, the timing with Don having just passed away. This will be our very next concert in a way. I think there's something interesting about that.
Yeah, and dedicating it to him is just the best way to honor his legacy. He was really excited about the program. Of course, he knew about it. I think you guys even talked together last year when you were in the planning stages, and he had lots of ideas. So these things sort of evolve in their own way, and you sometimes wonder if there's divine intervention as these things get planned, and sort of later on it seems so evident that that was the right concert at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, to have Mark there, Mark is arranging a bunch of stuff for us, Gabriele and all of that. So there's so many layers that are cool about it. So we're really excited about that. And other than that, I think we're just trying to, help as much as we can at Nazareth with students there and do some outreach there. And that's always exciting to work and find easier, better ways of making it happen. I think a cool thing that's going on now, we bring our professional quartet, the Salif Quartet. They come in and they do a reading session for the composers at Nazareth. And so, which is great. So they play their pieces and then they give them feedback saying, well, this works on the viola, this doesn't work on the violin, and try this, try that. And I think that kind of a thing is really important.
Or this works on your computer, but it doesn't work on my instrument.
Right.
That, like, in residence quartet, who makes up that quartet?
So that is all RPO members. It's Thomas Rogers and Molly McDonald are the violinists. Aika Ito, who now plays in Buffalo, but she was for many years in the RPO. She actually plays viola in the quartet, and Ben Krug is the cellist. Okay. And they have been a quartet since their grad school days at CIM. So while they were always busy rehearsing and performing, the relationship that we formed with them gave them kind of a more regular outlet and sort of diverse performing opportunities that I think they enjoy.
But how is your teaching, because I know you both teach, has that been impacted in any way by what you've learned from rehearsals with SCMR and just kind of what you've learned about running an organization and things like that?
Yeah, I think maybe we're able to help with maybe somebody like in your position who's interested in going into the field as a student, and we're able to give some hopefully practical advice about how to find funding, how to have a project, how to get admission. I think everybody in school goes, I'd love to do chamber music, and that's great. But we also want to say to them, it's hard to just do that alone. So what else are you going to do, and how can you diversify your musical career? And in that, you just try and give as much practical advice, having gone through this a little bit and seen how the operation works and has worked over 50 years, how it evolves. But we learn a lot too. I mean, there's a lot of music that I think we play or exposed to, or people that we play with that it's always wonderful playing with someone like Stephen Doan, who'll say things and do things in such a wonderful way. And, I'm sure there's times when you're teaching, you think of Stephen and you think, I remember him saying this in a rehearsal. So
yeah, I think as a teacher, you can sometimes get into an echo chamber, right? You're teaching your students, you're hearing your own thoughts about things. So certainly reminding yourself of the kind of ongoing creative process helps you remember what your students are going through, right? Because most often we're teaching our students things that we have already learned. But if we're all also continually in the process of learning new music and creating concerts, that creates a bond with them that we understand what they're going through. To Erik's point about, helping students who are feeling, I really want to go into chamber music, I want to find a way to make that my life. One of our most useful, meaningful pieces of advice came from Yo-Yo Ma years ago. He was playing with the RPO and, the news headlines are almost always built to give you a lot of internal strife. And this time was no different. It was probably an election moment. And we said to him, gosh, how do we get through this? How do we make a difference? And he said, you just find the cracks in society and you fill it with music wherever it is. And I loved that because, of course, on the level that he's doing it, that is touring the world and playing for people all over the place. And it could be easy to feel like, well, what can I do? I'm not Yo-Yo Ma. But the idea that whether you are starting a music school in a small town or putting on a chamber music series at a retirement center or anything, teaching young players, advanced players, every little bit makes a difference. And so I think it helps us to encourage our students not to just see a singular career path, but to try and make their communities better with what they can offer.
I was wondering how you both come up with those quotes. Is it just kind of like in conversation, or how do you do that?
It's with a glass of wine, Cori.
Oh, okay.
Before the season starts, we've planned everything, right? And we're getting ready to go to print, put everything on the website. And Meg Burton Tudman will say, okay, it'd be really helpful is if we just have kind of a sentence or two about each program. And it might be something that can intrigue someone who doesn't even know who we are, right? So we are trying to share something insightful, but also something that would make someone new comfortable to attend,
Yeah, we try and have a theme to the concert or a way to link a piece or two together in that. So there's some kind of understanding, there's connections in the music. But really, I think about what would make like my neighbor who's not a musician come to a concert, like if they were to read it in a paper or online and say, that sounds interesting, I want to check that out.
What are the similarities, like the main similarities and differences that you've noticed between playing in orchestral versus chamber music settings, or do you feel like they're more similar than they give credit for?
I think what you just said, way more similar than they're given credit for. When students are super excited about their chamber group and maybe not practicing as much for orchestra, I'm always quick to remind them at its best experience, orchestral playing is chamber music, right? So any of us, not just the concertmaster, not just the principal oboe, all of us should know the score well enough to know, oh, I'm accompanying the second clarinet here, or I have to really listen for the third horn in this spot, and listen to what's happening across the stage with the strings. So I think for us, of course, it is incredibly fulfilling to play chamber music. It gives everyone a soloistic role, right? And particularly for string players who maybe spend their career playing in the section, can be very gratifying to play chamber music and have a little more maybe artistic control over the final product. But for me, I am always wanting to take what I know and learn in both settings back and forth with me.
Okay.
Exactly. I mean, the other big one would be no conductor, So I think what's interesting there is establishing who says what when in the democratic process of being in a chamber group. And I'm sure it can get very democratic, and that can also be difficult. And sometimes if you're in a group maybe that plays more often together, you kind of say, well, we're just going to go with Sarah's idea today and just see how that one goes. Because otherwise you can have a real pull and push in the rehearsal, and you can get to a good place. But as you know, a camel is a horse designed by committee. Well, so I think in that regard, with having a conductor, he or she is in charge, and we do the best to, no matter what. That's what we try and figure out. We work within our sections and follow our principals and our leaders to get to the best execution of their vision. But with us, it is much more autonomy between all of us. So it can be messy, but I think that's what makes it really fun.
Have an idea of the level of preparation you would bring to a chamber music setting, because you are playing a solo part, right? There's nobody else to pick up for you if you aren't prepared. And I tell students all the time, bring that level of preparation to everything you do, because it's more fulfilling and you just will learn more about the musicians around you.
do you specifically go out meeting people to keep them in mind for SCMR concerts, or is it more of just like making musical connections and then down the line being like, oh, they would be good for this SCMR concert?
I think it's more that. I think we're
Okay.
just always trying to remain open and connected and available to our
Right.
musical colleagues. We may play together with people in multiple different settings before the opportunity arises to have them.
I guess, do you have any kind of like ending advice? I mean, you've already given so much, but if you have any advice.
I got a bit of advice from a bass player when I was very young, and I never really understood it, and it's becoming clearer. And he said to me, remember, it's about the music. And I think we can get wrapped up into so much, and you can forget that. And remember, it's about the music, especially in your darkest time or a time when you're feeling down about things. Remember, the music is your passion. It's why you're there in the first place. And so hold on to that light, because it can be hard, especially starting off or in the middle of your careers or whenever. It can be tough.
Politics, personalities, certain work situations that may not be ideal, or you may not have as much, control as you would like over the things that would make you feel most comfortable in the setting. But I think, to Erik's point of really holding on to why you do this, and that, all of these situations are transient. Nobody works with the same people for their entire career or plays one piece for their entire career. So there's always something to enjoy in the situation, even if there are difficulties. And I think the longer we do it, kind of almost the more zoomed out you can get and enjoy the big picture.
That's fantastic. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been really wonderful. So thank you.
Yay!
Great questions.
What a great way to spend some of our Sunday afternoon.